76-year-old George Peacock and his wife, 73-year-old Catherine Peacock, lived in Danby, Vermont in 1989. Danby is a small rural community of fewer than 1,300 people set in the mountains. On September 17th of 1989, a neighbor of the Peacocks entered their home after not seeing them for a few days. He found George's body at the bottom of the first-floor stairway in a large pool of blood. It was clear that he was involved in a struggle. Catherine was found face down on the floor of one of the upstairs bedrooms. She appeared to have been overpowered, subdued, and stabbed repeatedly. George was known to have a regular schedule. He had a habit of picking up a copy of the Rutland Herald every day. He didn't retrieve his copy on September 14th of 1989 or any day after that. This was out of character for him, as he was described to police as meticulous about maintaining his appointments. September 14th was 3 days before George and Catherine's bodies were found. This gave investigators a better idea of when their lives were ended. Investigators focused their attention on Michael Anthony Louise. He was married to one of the Peacock's daughters and lived in central New York. On September 18th of 1989, 1 day after the bodies were discovered, Louise and his wife had their first interview with investigators. Instead of driving their car, they had chose to drive a rental car to Vermont. Louise told his wife he was worried their car would break down, even though he had just taken it on a long drive just days before. He told investigators that he had dropped his wife off at her job on the morning of September 14th at 8:30. Louise told police that he randomly thought of retrieving some wood planks they had stored at the Peacock's home. Louise ran a few errands in the Syracuse area before heading toward Vermont by way of the Thruway around 9:30 a.m. Louise then apparently stopped a few times along the way before he reached Saratoga between 1:40 p.m. and 2:10 p.m. and rested there for a short while. He told police he realized he was too tired to go all the way to Vermont and decided to turn around. Back in the Syracuse area at 6:15 p.m., he picked up his paycheck from the rental car service at the Syracuse Hancock International Airport where he worked. About a month after the Peacock's bodies were found, a detective was updating Louise's wife on the investigation and told her they would be obtaining tolls. The detective also mentioned that a tan car was seen in the area at the time of the crime, the same color as the Louise family car. The detective was referring to telephone tolls, but she assumed they were speaking about tolls collected on the Thruway. Louise freaked out when he heard this. The next day, Louise left his home with a weapon and gave his wife a note that implied he considered taking his own life. In the letter, he said he was scared, he couldn't sleep or eat, and that law enforcement would not believe him. In an interview with police on September 30th of 1989, an investigator asked Louise if he had possibly blacked out, took the Peacock's lives, and couldn't remember. Louise replied, "Yes, I've thought about that," and did not elaborate. In an October 5th, 1989 interview with police and his lawyer Ed Mencken, a well-known Syracuse defense lawyer, Louise once again addressed the possibility of blacking out and attacking the Peacocks. Louise had a history of blacking out and once committed a violent crime. In 1966, Louise served time for assaulting a 4-year-old girl in Rhode Island. When he was interviewed by police, he claimed he blacked out. During the October 5th interview, he said that he thought a lot about whether it was possible he blacked out, but he was certain he did not go to Vermont and hurt them. Louise's wife had signed a consent form allowing police to search their Chevrolet Celebrity. Police informed her that she should not tell Louise the vehicle would be searched, so he could not destroy any potential evidence. She brought the Chevrolet to be searched. Police gathered 17 pieces of evidence for the laboratory examination. One of the items, in the driver's side front floor mat, appeared to have a small reddish-brown stain. The Vermont State Police Crime Lab confirmed that the spot was a small deposit of blood. Unfortunately, the sample was too small for the technology at the time to create a DNA profile. In 1992, Louise's niece, Patricia Gannon, told investigators that Louise told her and his wife that he had gone all the way to Vermont, but drew a blank about what had happened. In May of 2020, two detectives with the Vermont State Police began reviewing the cold case. The detectives resubmitted several pieces of physical evidence to the forensic lab in the hope that advancements in testing and technology could crack the case. One of the pieces of evidence they submitted was from the driver's side front floor mat from Louise's tan Chevrolet Celebrity. As the chemist was examining the floor mat, he noted that the blood had been removed and retesting of the area yielded no results. The chemist looked into the case files and discovered the stain was removed during a previous round of DNA testing in the year 2000. Luckily, a DNA extract from the sample was preserved in a foil pack in the permanent evidence freezer inside the Vermont lab. The chemist submitted the DNA extract for retesting on May 14th of 2020. On October 19th of the same year, investigators received reports from the forensic lab. The report revealed that the blood on the floor mat was a mixture of at least two individuals. The major DNA profile found in the sample was a match for George Peacock's DNA, according to the court documents. The other DNA in the mixture was determined to be unsuitable for interpretation. Over the next 2 years, detectives re-interviewed several people close to the investigation, including Louise's wife and his niece. After all the evidence, both circumstantial and physical, was complied, detectives submitted their probable cause affidavit and requested a warrant for Louise's arrest on October 11th of 2022. Michael Anthony Louise was arrested 2 days later in his home in Salina, New York, and charged with taking the lives of George and Catherine Peacock. He was held in the Onondaga County Justice Center and was arraigned in Syracuse. Then, on October 14th, he appeared in court with his new defense attorney, Charles Keller, for an extradition hearing. Louise was brought into court in a wheelchair. During the hearing, Louise consented to be extradited to Vermont. Investigators in Vermont have 2 weeks to carry out the extradition before Louise can argue to be released. Keller told the court that Louise was eager to be extradited as soon as possible so he could contest the allegations against him. Despite the excruciating detail in the court documents making their case, police don't address one major mystery. Why were the couple's lives taken? The hope is that Louise will confess and reveal why he did what he did. 42-year-old Francisca Perea-Dominguez lived in Aurora, Colorado in 2006. She lived in an apartment with a roommate. On July 1st of 2006, Francisca's friends found her body lying on her back on the bedroom floor of her apartment. She had been stabbed in the abdomen and assaulted. A neighbor of Francisca told the police that she had heard a lot of bumping and running through the apartment above her. She said that it sounded like Francisca and her roommate was struggling or wrestling. The roommate was identified as Salvador Hernandez Morales. The neighbors said that Hernandez Morales left their apartment around 1 p.m. Police tracked down his employer and learned that he had not shown up for work shortly after Francisca's body was found. Investigators then started to believe that he fled back to his home country of Mexico. Investigators collected DNA belonging to an unknown man from Francisca's body. They also collected items that belonged to Hernandez Morales from the apartment. In 2021, Hernandez Morales' toothbrush was used to create a DNA profile for him. It was then compared to the male DNA found inside of Francisca's body. In October of 2022, it was confirmed that Salvador Hernandez Morales is the man responsible for taking the life of Francisca Perea-Dominguez. Investigators believe he is still living in Mexico. They are asking for the public's help to give them specific locations so he can be extradited. Aurora Police Department Cold Case Detective Jason McDonald said, "Our cold case motto is we will never forget. We will never stop trying to solve these cases. Cold cases are the most difficult cases." It was a matter of DNA evidence and items needed to be tested that haven't previously been tested. Identifying those items and getting them to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation is what ultimately led to identifying the roommate as the suspect. 78-year-old Mary Hague Kelly lived in Dallas, Texas in 1989. One morning in January, a family member of Mary stopped by her home to check on her. When he was unable to get Mary to answer the door, he feared that she might be sick or injured, so he used his personal key to enter the residence. He then found Mary's body under her bed and called the Dallas Police Department. Detectives determined there were several items missing from Mary's home, indicating that burglary could be the motive. There were no signs of forced entry. The Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office conducted an autopsy and found that Mary had been strangled. Several persons of interest were interviewed. Fingerprints that were also found at the crime scene were submitted for comparison. Ultimately, the comparisons revealed that not one of the persons of interest matched the evidence at the crime scene. The case information was submitted to the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program in hopes of finding any other possibly related cases. Pawn shops were contacted throughout the city to check for stolen items missing from Mary's home. Without witnesses to the crime, and with all leads exhausted, the case eventually went cold. Then, in November of 2021, the Dallas County District Attorney's Office teamed with Othram to see if advanced DNA testing could provide help in the 1989 case. Forensic DNA evidence from the crime scene was sent to Othram Lab. Their scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing to develop a genealogical profile from DNA evidence. Othram's in-house genealogy team used the DNA profile to perform a genealogical search and were able to produce investigative leads that were submitted back to the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. The Dallas County District Attorney's Office, working with Dallas Police Department, continued the investigation and eventually identified 53-year-old David Rojas as the man responsible for taking the life of Mary Hague Kelly. He was identified on June 28th of 2022. Then on July 22nd, 53-year-old Rojas was arrested and charged with ending her life. Rojas's half-brother lived next door to Mary at the time of the crime. He was 20 years old back then. Police tracked down the half-brother in question and then used a six-pack of Bud Light he discarded to ensure it was David Rojas's DNA that was found on Kelly's body. The funding for Othram's DNA testing and genealogical research was provided through a grant from Season of Justice. The Season of Justice grant was awarded to Leighton D. Antoni from the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. Leighton D. Antoni had this to say: "Working with Othram and the Season of Justice became a no-brainer. The results across the country speak for themselves. My job is to aggressively pursue justice in a responsible and ethical manner. Sometimes that requires us to go outside traditional investigative methods to solve our most difficult cold cases. In the last 33 years, countless people have put in hundreds of hours of investigative work on the Mary Kelly cold case. But at the end of the day, it was Othram that solved this difficult case. Othram performed the necessary forensic testing and was able to put those results to work identifying our suspect. This case does not get solved without them. David Rojas is being held at the Dallas County Jail on a $750,000 bond."